Okay, welcome back to the final week of PMGT 4030. This week we're talking about procurement management. In this set of lessons or lectures, these are the objectives. Please pause the video and review those now. Okay, picking up just kind of a refresher to refocus us. Remember, we're always trying to integrate. We're looking to use the 5 process groups, which are groupings of the processes that work well together to build the project management plan. This is predictive or waterfall project management, and these most of these plans are called subsidiary plans, or they're also called constraints. They tell us how we're going to do something. Remember, project management is a framework from which you have to pick the input processes, inputs, tools, and outputs to make success. And when you're building the project plan, you're also using the documents. These are active. To change the project plan requires the change control process, ICC, Integrated Change Control. To change the project documents or to use these active documents, no, you can change them at will. Other than the charter, the SOW, and agreements, you use them, they're active, but you really shouldn't change them. You can, but you shouldn't. Okay, now moving on, procurement overview. Before we get started, I really want you to be aware of the project manager's role. It kind of reverses here. See, we've spent so much time being large and in charge that now we have to go, we're the buyer, and though we're going to define the requirements, they have a project manager who is that large and in charge, and we become the customer. So we want to know procurement processes. We want to ensure that our scope in the project is now developed into a procurement scope for the contract. Very important. I once had a project in the Air Force where I just assumed the procurement manager knew what they were doing. I was the project manager. And in the end, I didn't get what I wanted because I didn't work closely with them. So there's a project manager, but now you're working with a procurement manager. And the procurement manager is very important because they're the only one really authorized in a company, other than the CEO or a few others, to spend money or obligate money. Every time I deployed in the Air Force as a commander, I couldn't spend money on the economy for goods and services. I had a procurement officer with me. Okay? Very important relationship. And we're going to talk about procurement then in these 3 processes as we develop and administer agreements such as contracts, such as MOAs called Memoranda of Agreement, SLAs, these are service level agreements. You all have service level agreements whether you realize it or not. Your cell phone is maybe Motorola or Samsung. It is using a Sprint service, so it has a service level agreement. And that Sprint doesn't have towers everywhere, but they are using towers and satellites of AT&T and Verizon and others. And they have service level agreements that guarantee a level of service. Very important in this procurement process. So we're going to do it by 3 processes. Plan procurements, which is documenting the decisions, procurement decisions, specifying the approach and identifying potential sellers. Then we're going to conduct procurements. At the end of that, we're going to have a contract. It's set, an agreement. And then we're going to have to control it, control procurements. So the procurement processes here are presented as discrete processes with defined interfaces in practice, but in reality, of course, they overlap. Then I call this the tale of 2 roles, and I began to allude to it a few minutes ago, the procurement manager and the project manager, the PM and the PM. One is going to act as the buyer, that's the project manager. One is going to, and the procurement manager with them. And the other team is going to have a project manager as the seller organization. So I just mentioned an agreement is a contract. It can be a service level agreement. It can be a memorandum of agreement or a purchase order. And the life cycle can begin and end during any phase of your project where you need contract work done. I've already discussed then the project manager role and the procurement role. It's the project manager's job to build relationships with the procurement manager and others and to maintain those while meeting the contract. The procurement manager is going to apply the company's procurement strategy. So they're going to offer the type of contract and the process for solicitation. Whether you do a request for proposal, RFP, or an invitation for bid, IFB, or a request for quote, RFQ. And remember, contracts are a formality. So these are no small things. Your company should have a specific strategy to maximize your contract advantages while creating a win-win situation between you and the seller. And speaking of that, realize that besides the project manager and the procurement manager, you notice the title up top, the third line, the other relationship I want you to be aware of is the buyer and the seller. The buyer is the one making the purchase. On the certification exam, unless it says otherwise, and it probably won't, you will assume you are the buyer, the project manager. This is your project and you're going to buy something to fill a work package that has a need. And the seller is, the other company is going to have a project manager themselves. They are known by several terms: contractor, vendor, service provider, or supplier. And they themselves may go out and contract portions of the item they are making for you. Realize there are several types of procurement organizations. The centralized and decentralized both have advantages and disadvantages, and you can read more about that on page 462 of the PMBOK Guide Edition 6. I suggest you review that. But there you are, centralized and decentralized, both with advantages, both with disadvantages. So for example, in decentralized, PM, I'm saying the PM has easier access to the project manager. I would have easier access in decentralized because my procurement manager is working right for me. They will be loyal to me. That's nice. Unfortunately, the procurement manager has no home. They're not working in a centralized office. So when the project's over, there's nowhere to go. It's my role to help find them work. They may have less standardization because they're not getting templates, for example, from a centralized contracting office. Less expertise because they may not getting new best practices that a centralized office may provide. Okay, advantages, disadvantages to both. Okay, then we're looking at trends and emerging practices, tailoring and agile considerations. Trends are advances in tools. What used to be entirely a paperwork drill and tedious and very specific, today is an electronic, largely an electronic solicitation for work. So it will have more advanced risk management capability and knowledge. The changing of contract processes is more fluent through these automated processes. We continue to increase emphasis on logistics and supply chain in the procurement realm. So we talked about that in resource management, about how it was important when a tractor arrived or a hoe or some sort of major piece of equipment. That stuff matters, and that's all about the logistics and supply of it, etc. And you can read the rest of those and review the PMBOK Guide. Tailoring because of the complexity, because we're not co-located, because so much of it's done online, that if you're a government contract, there's so much governance overhead, like the FARs, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, etc., and availability of contractors. And then some agile considerations, again, I ask you to review in the PMBOK Guide. Okay? Now, we're going to close this first part with the inputs of Plan Procurement Management. Of course, if I go into Plan Procurement Management, my output is going to be my procurement management plan, amongst others. But let's start with the inputs. There are so many to consider. And so we want to, in this process, document the decisions, specify the approach, identify potential sellers. And the key benefit of this process is that it determines whether we're even going to acquire the goods or services from outside the project or inside. And that's going to be the make or buy decision that we have in the set of inputs. So going down through the list of inputs, we have the charter, because that's going to provide a product description. Going back to the very first lessons we had in week 1, we're going to have business documents, which are going to include, as they did in week 1, the business case, making sure our procurement is aligned with the business need, and our benefits management plan. That's going to describe when specific project benefits are available. And then I'm going to have the project plan. That's a regular input. In this place, I want scope, quality, resource management, and then the scope baseline. The scope baseline will be used to develop the SOW. We've talked about the SOW many times. It also will be used to develop the TOR, T-O-R. That stands for Terms of Reference. Okay, before we go on, we just talked the project plan. I asked a question there. In a quick review, what are the 3 baseline items in any project? I have referred to it unofficially as the iron triangle. The official term is the performance measurement baseline, and individually that's made up of the scope baseline, which are requirements, cost baseline, which is the budget, and schedule baseline, which is the time frame. Okay, project documents are listed there, and they are clearly articulated in the PMBOK guide. I just want to point out that one of the project documents are the requirements documentation, and that this is about describing how individual requirements meet the business need, just as a quick review. And then, of course, EEFs and OPAs. When I say OPAs this time, though, because we're in procurement management, these are contracts, I want you to be aware of the 3 types of contracts that you will be tested on. Fixed price, or FP, cost reimbursable contracts, or CR, and time and material contracts. So I'm looking to, using those contract vehicles, they're called fixed price, cost reimbursable, or time and material, using one of those contract vehicles. So in fact, some contracts that I've done at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois actually are a mix of fixed price and time and material, for example. So they can even be a mix of them. Okay, so we're looking for a pre-approved seller list, formal policies as inputs from the company, and the contract types determined. Okay, that's it. Let's take a quick break, and then before we continue with planning, the tools and techniques and the outputs, let's take the next lesson and discuss those 3 types of contracts, those OPAs: fixed price, cost reimbursable, and time and material.